It was a cold Christmas Eve in the small suburban town where Camille lived. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in a pristine white, while the wind whispered through the trees. Inside her cozy two-story home, the warm glow of the fireplace flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Camille, a single mother, was busy in the kitchen, preparing the final touches for her Christmas dinner. She had spent weeks planning for this evening, her heart full of hope that it would be a peaceful, joyful time with her daughter, Zaria. Camille had always made it a point to create the perfect Christmas experience for Zaria, even though life as a single mother often meant long hours at work and tight budgets. But this year, things were different. For the first time in years, Camille had invited someone to share their holiday, a new friend she'd met recently. John was a man she'd encountered in the grocery store a few weeks before. He was charming, easy to talk to, and seemed to be genuinely interested in getting to know her. They had exchanged numbers and chatted on the phone several times. At first, Camille had been cautious, wary of letting anyone new into her life, especially with her daughter to protect. But John had a way about him that made her feel safe. His calming presence had eased her worries, and after much thought, she decided it would be nice to invite him over for Christmas dinner. A part of her hoped he could be a part of their small family, at least for the evening. Camille set the last of the dishes on the table, a beautifully cooked roast with all the trimmings. The kitchen smelled like garlic, rosemary, and sweet potatoes, and her mouth watered at the thought of the meal. Zaria, her 8-year-old daughter, was upstairs, putting on her new Christmas dress. Camille smiled to herself, glancing at the clock. John was supposed to arrive in about an hour. She sighed as she looked out the window at the snowflakes swirling in the air. Christmas had always been her favorite time of year. It was a chance for her to create a little magic, to make up for the challenges they had faced over the past few years. The last few months had been particularly difficult. Her ex-husband had been unreliable, making it even harder to juggle work and being a full-time parent. But this Christmas, Camille was determined to make it perfect. She had worked hard for this moment, and she refused to let anything spoil it. As Camille finished setting the table, she heard a knock on the door. She froze for a moment, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nervousness. John had arrived. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the door, her hands trembling slightly. She opened it, expecting to see John's warm smile, but instead, she was greeted by a man she didn't recognize. The stranger stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His features were sharp, his eyes piercing, and his dark coat was dusted with snow. He was tall, much taller than John, and there was something unsettling about the way he stood, as if he didn't quite belong in this peaceful neighborhood. Camille's instincts immediately went on high alert, but before she could react, the man spoke. "Is John here? I'm supposed to meet him." Camille's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't mentioned anyone else coming, and John hadn't mentioned anything about bringing someone along. She took a cautious step back, the door barely cracked open. "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are," she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. The man looked around, as if considering something. "Oh, my mistake. I was supposed to meet him here, but I got the address wrong." He gave a quick, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. Camille hesitated. Something wasn't right. She glanced over her shoulder at the table, at the dinner she'd worked so hard to prepare. The last thing she wanted was to invite a stranger into her home, especially not when her daughter was upstairs. "I'm afraid I can't help you," Camille said firmly, her voice tinged with the authority she usually reserved for times when she had to protect Zaria. The man's smile faded, and the mood shifted. It wasn't immediately obvious, but there was something in the air now. Something heavy. Something dangerous. "I'm sure you can help," he said, his voice lower now, his tone almost soothing. But there was an edge to it that Camille couldn't ignore. "It's Christmas, right? Surely, you wouldn't turn someone away on a night like this." Camille's mind raced. Her first instinct was to shut the door and call the police, but the man was standing too close. The last thing she wanted to do was escalate things, especially when Zaria was in the house. She took a steadying breath, trying to keep her cool. "Please, leave," she said, her voice unwavering now. The man's eyes narrowed, his lips twitching as if trying to suppress a grin. For a split second, Camille thought he might leave, but then, just as quickly, his demeanor shifted again, becoming colder, more menacing. "I'm not going anywhere until I see John," he said, his voice suddenly firm, almost commanding. The chill in the air grew thicker, and Camille felt her pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. But before she could take another step back, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. "Zaria." "Mom." "Who's at the door?" Zaria's voice called out. Camille turned just in time to see her daughter standing at the top of the stairs, her face glowing with excitement, unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the room. The man's eyes flicked to Zaria, his gaze lingering for a moment too long before he turned back to Camille. His smile returned, but now it was twisted. "I think it's time I came inside," he said softly, stepping forward. In that moment, Camille knew her Christmas dinner wasn't going to be anything like she had planned. Camille stood frozen at the door, her pulse pounding in her ears as the man took another step toward her. Her hand was still on the door handle, but it felt as though it weighed a ton. She was torn between slamming the door shut and keeping it open, not knowing how to handle the situation. Zaria was still on the stairs, her face full of curiosity, completely unaware of the danger that loomed just outside the door. "Mom. Who is it?" Zaria's voice carried the innocence of a child, but it only made Camille more anxious. She didn't want her daughter involved in any way. She couldn't afford to let the situation escalate. "Zaria, go back to your room." "Now," Camille ordered, her voice firm, though it trembled just slightly. She needed to protect her daughter, but she also didn't want to make the situation worse. Zaria hesitated for a moment, clearly confused, but she eventually obeyed and slowly turned to head back upstairs. Camille took a deep breath and closed the door halfway, creating a small barrier between herself and the stranger. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but I don't want any trouble," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You need to leave." The man's expression softened, but there was a coldness beneath his words when he spoke again. "I'm sorry if I've frightened you. But you see, I don't think it's wise for me to leave just yet. You've invited me in, haven't you?" His words were confusing, and for a moment, Camille had to fight to keep her composure. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice strained. "I don't know you." The man sighed, almost as if he were disappointed in her. He took a step back, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it out to her, and Camille reluctantly took it. It was a note, scribbled in a handwriting she didn't recognize. It read, "I'll be at your house tonight. Don't worry. I know everything about you." Camille felt a chill run down her spine as her stomach turned. She had no idea who could have sent this, but it was clear that this man was no stranger, he knew things about her that she hadn't shared with anyone. Her hand shook as she dropped the note. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile returned, though it wasn't comforting in the least. "Just a little bit of holiday cheer. I'm sure we can all have a nice time together. You and your daughter, and me." Camille's heart raced as she weighed her options. She needed to get control of the situation, but she didn't want to provoke him further. She needed time to think. "I think you should leave now," Camille said again, her voice cold and commanding. "I won't ask again." The man seemed to consider her words, but then he gave a soft chuckle, one that made Camille's skin crawl. "You really don't have a choice in the matter, do you?" he said, his voice slipping into something darker. Before Camille could react, the man pushed the door open fully, sending it slamming against the wall. His sudden force took her by surprise, and for a moment, she lost her footing. Her heart raced as the man stepped inside, his cold presence filling the small entryway. Camille took a step back, her mind racing. She had to think quickly. This was no longer just an uncomfortable situation, it was a dangerous one. She quickly glanced toward the kitchen, where the dinner was still set on the table. There was a phone on the counter, but it was too far away for her to reach without turning her back on the man. "Don't you dare move," the man said, his voice now low and dangerous. He stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "We're going to have a nice dinner together, whether you like it or not." Camille's heart pounded in her chest. This man wasn't just threatening her, he was threatening her family. He was invading her home, her sanctuary, and she couldn't let him do that without a fight. "I'm calling the police," Camille said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She stepped toward the kitchen, but the man was faster. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her back, forcing her to stumble. "That's not going to work," he said with a grin, twisting her arm behind her back. "I don't think the police will get here in time. And I know you don't want to cause any trouble." Camille's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. She couldn't let this man take control of the situation. She had to protect Zaria. She couldn't lose this fight. Not tonight. Before she could make another move, the sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Camille froze. It was Zaria, coming back downstairs. Her daughter's voice called out softly, "Mom." The man's expression darkened, and Camille felt a surge of panic. No, not Zaria. Not her little girl. "Stay where you are," the man hissed. He was quick to cross the room and block the staircase, his eyes narrowing as he faced Camille. Camille could see the wicked glint in his eyes now, he wasn't just a stranger. He was something much worse. "Your daughter," he said, the words dripping with malice, "is exactly who I came for." Camille's heart skipped a beat. Her daughter was in danger. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to protect Zaria, no matter what. "Zaria, go back to your room," Camille shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. Zaria hesitated at the top of the stairs, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She looked between her mother and the man, sensing the tension in the air. "Mom. What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Go upstairs, Zaria. Now." Camille commanded again, her voice firm but laced with fear. The little girl's eyes filled with doubt, but she listened and retreated up the stairs. Camille turned to face the man, who was now blocking the hallway, his eyes gleaming with twisted satisfaction. "Well, that's one down," the man muttered, his voice low and sinister. He glanced at the staircase, as though assessing his next move. Camille's blood ran cold as she realized that this wasn't just a random act of violence, this man had a plan. Her mind raced, searching for any way out of this. She needed to buy time, but how? Camille knew she couldn't take him on alone. She needed help, and fast. "Who are you?" she demanded, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. "Why are you doing this?" The man chuckled, his breath heavy. "You'll find out soon enough. But for now, just know that you've been quite accommodating. And I appreciate that. I don't get many invitations like this." The way he spoke made Camille's skin crawl. He was toying with her, enjoying every second of her fear. "Please," Camille said, her voice shaking as she tried to keep her composure. "I don't know you. I don't want any trouble. Just let us go." The man's eyes darkened, and his smile faltered. "Trouble? Oh, no. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to have dinner. You invited me, remember?" He stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. "And you won't be getting rid of me that easily." Camille felt a rush of adrenaline. She couldn't let him intimidate her any longer. She had to find a way to get control of the situation. The man's attention shifted, and Camille saw her opening. The phone in the kitchen. It was still too far away, but if she could just get him distracted for a moment, she could reach it and call the police. But as if he had read her mind, the man's eyes flicked toward the kitchen. "I wouldn't try that if I were you," he warned, his voice cold. "You won't get very far." Camille felt a lump form in her throat. This was worse than she had thought. He knew everything about her. He had planned this. He was prepared. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. Camille flinched and turned toward the noise, her heart pounding. The man chuckled again, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Nice try," he said. "But now you've really made things interesting." It was too late. Camille's brief moment of hope evaporated. She had failed. Zaria was upstairs, and the man was here to stay. "Now, let's see what happens next," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. He took another step toward Camille, a predatory glint in his eyes. Camille had no choice now but to play along, to keep him distracted long enough for her to think of a way out. But the sinking feeling in her chest told her that the worst was yet to come. The man's heavy footsteps echoed as he moved closer. Camille's mind raced. She had to act fast, she could feel the cold pressure of impending danger pushing in on her, but she needed to stay calm. Her daughter's safety depended on it. Taking a slow breath, she forced herself to stand tall, despite the mounting fear. The man was clearly enjoying the power he held over her. But Camille wasn't about to let him win. Not without a fight. "What do you want from us?" she asked, keeping her voice as steady as possible. He stopped in his tracks, staring at her with an unsettling grin. "I told you, I'm just here for dinner." His gaze flickered briefly toward the table, where the meal had long since gone cold. "But there's more to it than that. It's the invitation. It's the trust you put in me. That's the fun part." Camille's blood chilled. Trust? She had never invited a stranger into her home. This man was clearly delusional, but the way he spoke, with such conviction, made it hard to deny that he had been planning this for a long time. Her mind flashed to the locked drawer in the kitchen where she kept her pepper spray. It wasn't much, but it might give her the upper hand if she could just reach it. "I don't understand," Camille said, trying to buy herself more time. "You're crazy. We don't know you. You've got the wrong house." The man tilted his head, his smile widening. "No, Camille. You've got it wrong. I don't have the wrong house." He took a step closer, and Camille instinctively backed up. "I know everything about you. I know about your past, your family. I know about your secrets." Camille's stomach twisted. The past. She had done everything to put that life behind her. How could he know? "You're a fool if you think you can just erase it," the man said, his voice suddenly cold. "But it's okay. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to make you remember." Every inch of Camille's body screamed for her to run. But her feet were rooted to the floor. The realization hit her, he had been watching her for a long time. The invitation, he had orchestrated it all. Before Camille could gather her thoughts, a sound from upstairs caught both their attention. Zaria. She had come down. Camille's heart pounded in her chest. She had to get to her daughter, she couldn't let her be part of this nightmare. "Zaria!" Camille shouted, her voice shaking but resolute. "Get back upstairs. Now." But the man's laugh stopped her. "You think I'm just going to let you run upstairs and protect her? You really have no idea who you're dealing with." Camille could feel the trap closing in around her, but she refused to let her daughter become a victim. There was no more time for games. She needed to act. She took a deep breath and glanced around the hallway. The door to the basement. If she could just get to the back door, she could get help. The thought of running terrified her, but she couldn't let him have control anymore. She wouldn't allow it.